All right. We are live. Let's give it a second to kick in. Thanks for joining us. Let's see if people get the message. Just getting things all set up over here. Doing my best to avoid you guys having to hear me swallow my coffee. All right, here we are. It's March. What is today? The 21st. March 21st, 2020. We continue. We're talking today about vocoders. So, hopefully, we get some people in here who want to hear about vocoders. Yesterday's show indeed got a copyright flag. And of course, it's an automated process of, you know, artificial intelligence listening to work, listening and processing newly uploaded video content, and comparing it against all the content ID registered works, of which Joey Beltram's Energy Flash was one of those works. And so we got a flag. It's one of these flags that allows us to keep the video up, so it shouldn't really negatively impact us per se, especially since the monetization income for something like that is probably like $1 or something like this. So not really a beef. What's up, Dave, young professor, one of my oldest colleagues and friends and teachers for years. Really glad to see you in here. We'll see if anyone else catches on. And yeah, just going to fiddle with my microphone. All right. So today we're getting into vocoders. And hey, there's Noise Bleeder. What's up, man? It says we have both of you guys in the chat room, but one concurrent viewer. This is strange. I think the site is running a little slow. All right. Well, today we're talking about vocoders. Vocoders, of course, were developed as a wartime voice encoding tool by the military and by Bell Labs specifically, I think. And hey, Wambra, what's up? And the technology was eventually consumed, swallowed by the music scene, right? Much like a lot of our gear in the electronics world these days, much of what we use originally was intended for military purposes. And so, there's something strange and dystopian and dark about that in general, I think. But the vocoder has a specifically military background, and we use it in slightly different ways than they used it. Though we see some implementations of these things in our modern vocoders. Let's take a look here. I just found this wonderful graphic from the 40s, kind of showing the signal flow of the early vocoder. Okay, the signal originates in the brain of the vocalist. They sing that idea into a microphone, where that information is sent to two places: to a frequency spectrum analyzer and fundamental frequency analyzer. Those things are sent along down the line into the vocoder itself. That's what this selective transmission function device here is. That's the function it's performing, okay? This is going to be, the voice essentially is our modulator, right? It's the content that we send in to the vocoder box, which is then muxed together, multiplexed together with some sort of additional signal, the carrier. And we can see in the carrier section here, it's got kind of a switch between a buzz, a tone, or a hiss. Keep in mind, this is from 1940. A hiss in the form of noise, a buzz in the form of a tone, and there's a switch between those things, and the signals are combined. Bits of those signals are put together and sent through the loudspeaker. So, um, interesting visual. Just got a MI warps, huh? I love the parasite on warps. I use it almost exclusively as a uh, uh, delay in live performance. I love the Warps Parasite delay. It's got a couple of different delays in there. Warps, of course, if you don't know, is a hardware vocoder and distortion and all kinds of different things module from Mutable Instruments. I bought Warps specifically for a film score that I was helping um, a film composer complete, and he had written a score for this film, and he kind of had some voice-ish type of synthesizer tones in there, but he wanted to vocode it. The premise of the movie was that actually maybe you've heard of it. If not, you can probably find it out there. It's called Operator. It stars oh shit, I'm not going to remember the guy's name. One of the guys from Silicon Valley, the guy who plays the really dry, long-haired coder, Guilfoyle is his name in that show. The film is called Operator. It's semi-drama, semi um, comedy, basically about a man who creates an AI to, in a sense, replace his wife. And so the film scorer, the film composer, Sage Lewis is his name, great film scorer, great guy. He wanted to have some sort of character in the thematic content of the music. He wanted to have some vocalizations, and so he went through and cut out some vocals from the AI voice that's used in the movie, and he wanted to vocode that. So I figured let's do it through Warps, and we could have done it in Ableton, but it turned out to be a lot more fun to do it through Warps. Um, yes, Wambra Parasites does still have the vocoder. It has all of the original modes, and in addition, it has some other features, including this really great delay. But you do get the kind of selection of all of the original 9, I think it is, modes, and it's really strong, really great module. Now, yeah, really genius Parasites code on Warps, I have to say. It's one of my favorite modules. I almost always use it when I take it with me live. Now, the theory here that we're going to get into is universal. It doesn't really matter which vocoder you use. The more important thing is what we just saw in that graphic, that we maintain 2 signals, right? One of them is most often going to be a voice. Um, doesn't We don't have to use our brain so much in that regard, like the graphic shows us. Um, yeah, most of the Warps modes are pretty ripping. A lot of distortions in there, a lot of gritty wave folding and other distortion, Chebyshev distortion, things like this. Um, Really awesome module though, and some of those things would probably need to be used with a little bit of uh, consideration, a little bit of tempering of our what's the word I'm looking for? Signals. Um, so, like this graphic would suggest, we need an input signal, which is most commonly going to come from the voice. This is our modulator. And we need a carrier signal, a tone, a buzz, a hiss. And what this is, what that character uh, is, really defines the nature of the sound that the vocoder creates. So, um, yeah, I love the brain uh, being involved in this circuit here. Um, the the bigger picture though is that we need, like maybe FM synthesis, like so many other forms of uh, modulation based synthesis, we need to have multiple signals. And if those signals aren't the right kind of signals, then we might never get the results that we want. We might never get things to sound as intended as we would like to for them to sound, as we've heard them sound in other tracks. So, um, the input signal, the synthesizer voice, the buzz or hiss in this particular graphic is going to be very important, and what we use there is going to largely determine the result of the tonality, right? Keep in mind, we want this thing to sound like words, recognizable words, ideally. And so we need something tonally that's going to help us to hear those words. So we have a few options there. Maybe we'll reference a few famous vocoder type of tracks, vocoder, tracks that made the vocoder famous, whether people know it or not. Um, so let's come in here. We're going to do most of this in Ableton, probably maybe all of it in Ableton. But keep in mind, the functionality here is universal. We need two signals. One is going to be our voice, most likely. Doesn't have to be. One is going to be a synthesizer. What's up, Astrofish? Thanks for joining us. Okay, we're getting into it now. We're going to find first a vocal sample, something that maybe doesn't have sung words yet. Maybe it's just spoken words. That's one of the benefits of the vocoder. We don't have to be great singers. We can just say the words, and as long as we have the right synth voice, it's going to sound like those words in a musical context, right? In a harmonically sensible, hopefully, context. So I think one of the vocals that I caught on to was something like this. We're just going to use really dumb Ableton library vocals because I don't want to get another copyright flag like I got yesterday. So
There's not a solo there. There's not
okay,
a solo.
there that's good enough. Sounds like a German woman speaking English. That makes sense. So here we're gonna drop that clip onto a track, and we can just loop it. That's okay. Um, You'll slow down the tempo though. And all right, so we have a vocal. On this vocal track, we are going to place the vocoder. Okay. And let's just get rid of all the other superfluous stuff in here. So now we've loaded a vocoder onto a vocal. And this is where the Ableton vocoder usually turns people off because by default, we end up with the hiss side of things, right? The it does not really have a looper, Wambra. The talking about warps, you could maybe, in a loose sense, use it sort of as a looper, but not really a proper looper. Um, okay, so recall the graphic we looked at previously. It had the voice going in one input, and then in the other input, it had a buzz or a hiss, right? A tone or noise. And in the Ableton vocoder, by default, we are offered a carrier in the form of noise. Okay, the modulator is what's coming through this channel. So if you want to do live real-time vocals, we just have to set up the audio from our audio interface, take audio in from our microphone, and load the vocoder on there. Okay, and then as soon as we do, we're going to have our voice mixed vocoded with noise. Okay, so if we play this now, this is going to sound like absolute terror fuel.
There's not a soul out there. There's not a soul out there. There's not a soul out there. There's not a soul out there.
Hopefully you guys can hear that.
There's not a soul out there. There's not a soul out there.
Okay, like great for your horror movie voice effects, great for scaring the kids on Halloween, but maybe not so great for musical purposes. Maybe fine for vocoding a voice in the form that the military could use of some way, shape, or form. I don't know. Maybe that was the original focus of this, but not the most useful carrier. Yes, we can hear the words.
There's not a soul out there.
Right? Again, compared to that to
There's not a soul out there.
that. Ugh, rough. So, not the most musical application, but something interesting at least. Hey, it could be a thing. But this isn't going to give us our typical our typical vocoded tonality. When we think of the vocoder, what are some tracks that come to mind, or some artists that come to mind? Anybody got any ideas there? And maybe also sensible to separate here the subject of the talk box, which is kind of our classic version of a musical application of a vocoder-like instrument, right? But that is, maybe popularized, of course, by Peter Frampton. Frampton Comes Alive. Of course, my favorite talkbox act, Zappin' Roger Troutman. Probably one of the most listened to vocoder artists, or talkbox artists, excuse me. So they kind of led the way with this organic electronic voice manipulation thing, right? They really kind of set the stage and for a lot of the musical applications of these tools. But when we think of the vocoder, there's a couple of acts that come to mind to me anyway. One is maybe going to be Daft Punk, right? Daft Punk repeatedly using the vocoder back in their classic days in the mid to late 90s, and of course in recent form in Get Lucky with Pharrell and Nile Rodgers from Chic. Right? These are some of the classic examples of vocoders around the world, things like that. Another artist that comes to mind immediately when I think of vocoders would be Imogen Heap, whose probably arguably biggest hit, Hide and Seek, is basically just voice and vocoder, right? Voice and some sort of synth vocoder. I think the what am I trying to say? I'm reading your guys' chat while I'm trying to talk here. This is my problem, not yours. We need the right tones to mix with this thing, and noise ain't it. So instead of noise in this carrier menu, we're generally going to pick external. That way we can really control the character of that noise. If we use modulator, then the voice is going to be modulating itself. We probably will not hear as much of a drastic change to the character of the voice, though we might be able to use the modulator for some creative uses of the vocoder. And pitch tracking switches our carrier mode into a pitch tracking oscillator, which tries sort of to track the pitch of the vocal and generate a built-in synthesizer that will vocode with the voice. Again, not really very controllable or musical if we want to do things that feel like typical vocoding manipulation. So we're generally going to go with external. And when we do, notice that this vocoder now wants to take audio from another signal, right? Another source. And that's going to be from another track. So let's add in a MIDI track. And okay. Now, let's get rid of this channel strip. And now we need a synth. And maybe we'll just go with Serum because that's maybe the popular synth of the day. But again, it doesn't matter what synth you use as much as it matters what tone it generates. Okay, so let's bring this synth over to the MIDI track. And then we'll tell the vocoder, look to channel 2, the Serum channel, and take that signal, and that's post effects is fine. Post effects and pre effects, of course, refer to any audio effects that might be on this particular channel, and we're tapping in either before pre effects or after post effects, or we have the option to tap into the post mixer, which will grab the signal after our mixer level and panning. So post or pre effects doesn't really matter at this point because we're not really doing anything to the Serum channel for the most part. Okay, and we'll open up Serum just so that we can refer back to this. So now we have at least the setup going, and if we play the vocal, we'll notice things start moving around. Okay, great. If I play the keyboard, oh yeah, we're going to turn off the keyboard channel. We're going to mute the keyboard channel so we don't hear the dry keyboard. Because that's not what we're here for, right? We're here for the vocoded vocals, not the dry keyboard signal or the dry synth signal. Okay, so we can see, though, it's still coming into this channel, right? When I play the synth, it still comes in to the post effects meter down here on the vocoder. Okay, so let's try, you know what, before we even go any further, let's zoom in a little bit. This will make this all a little bit easier to look at. There we go. Giant Ableton. Okay, so again, we chose the external input. We chose our synth channel. And now when we play the synth, which we've muted on its own channel, we get a signal to the input. When we play the vocal, we get a signal to the multiband vocoder modulator input. But we don't hear anything from either of those sounds on their own at this point, right? We need to bring these things together at the same time so that one is taking influence from the other, and then we should hear something. So we can loop the vocal, and if I play a chord on the keyboard,
There's not a solo.
well, let's watch our level.
There's not a solo there. There's not a solo there. There's not a solo there. There's not a solo there.
I'm just playing a minor triad, minor and then major triad. So what are we doing? We are taking the vocal signal, we're dividing it up into a certain number of frequency bands, right? And then we're mixing it together with the spectral information from the synthesizer, the tonal character of the synthesizer.
There's not a solo there. 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 There's not a solo there.
Okay, so we're already kind of getting into the direction of the Imogen Heap hide and seek sound. You might have heard this song at your grocery store if you're not a big Imogen Heap fan. But if we turn up the unison voices. And by the way, you should be a huge Imogen Heap fan. She's one of the leading music technologists in our field, and uh, doing consistently doing interesting things from supporting blockchain music download and royalty payments so that everyone related to a track, musicians, songwriters, etc., are they know exactly how many times their songs are being played and who should be getting cuts of that performance. Um, she's constantly helping to innovate new technology. The Mimu, I think it's Mimu gloves. I think that's what it is. These interactive, expressive glove controllers for synthesis, performance, DAW control, things like this. Berkeley recently got a couple of pairs of them. It's one of these, she is just one of these luminaries who is constantly on the cutting edge. So you should know who Imogen Heap is. But let's take this sawtooth wave or ramp wave, as the case may be. We're going to increase the unison voices, slightly detune these voices, right? When we just have 7 unison voices. Not going to sound all that different from a single unison voice until we, or a single voice until we start to detune them.
There's not a solo there. 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 There's not a solo there.
Okay, so we can still hear the tonality of the voice, and or well, the tonality is maybe the wrong word. The intonation of the voice, the lyrical content, right? The word content, but the harmonic material is coming from the synthesizer. The tonal material is coming from the synthesizer. Oops, let's start that up again.
There's not a solo there. 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 There's not a solo there.
I think it's solo, or not solo, soul. There's not a soul out there. Is that what she's saying? I don't know. It's up for interpretation, especially once we start doing some vocoding. So, sawtooth wave, ramp wave, unison detuned, and playing in a chord. This starts to get us right into the direction of that hide and seek, Imogen Heap type of a sound. Again, the super saw, as we've dialed in here, is one of these classic electronic music sounds, and it's it's one of these things that is useful in so many ways. If we play that low, maybe one note at a time.
There's not a solo there. 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 There's not a solo. There's not a solo there. There's not a solo there. There's not a solo there.
Notice the low pass filter does not really help the situation. Try a high pass filter, maybe.
There's not a solo there. There's not a solo there. There's not a solo there.
That kind of works. I think generally we're going to want rich wave shapes, less sine waves and triangle waves, more square waves and sawtooth waves or other complex waves. Let's go to our basic shapes. This gives us our sine wave. Maybe we'll reduce our unison voices now. Not the most identifiable musical results with a sine wave. Triangle wave is certainly better than a sine wave, but all right. Well, let's move up to a square wave.
Solo there. There's not a 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 solo there.
And now we're starting to get a little bit more of that robotic character, right? Especially once we start going lower. Yeah, it's much better with that high frequency content. In fact, this square wave is getting us a little closer.
There's not a solo there. There's not a solo there. There's not a solo there.
Kind of depends, I think, with to a certain degree on the voice as well. But if we really want to go towards that Daft Punk robot type of vibe, another example that I love is one of the guys from Flight of the Conchords did a track years ago for Target at Christmas. Target created a new Christmas album, and all of their ads for that year's Christmas holiday used one of these many different new Christmas songs written by popular artists of the time. And one of the songs on there was by one of the members of Flight of the Conchords, and it's called Electronic Santa Claus. And it has a great vocoded vocal where the guy's just saying Electronic Santa Claus over and over again with a vocoder, and it's absolutely fantastic. That's one of my favorite songs, even not at Christmas time. It was just like one of these accidental classics that came from a commercial project. I'm sure they got paid very well for that, but that aside, it's another great example of this robot voice from the vocoder. Okay, let's take this square wave and we're going to pulse width modulate, or modulate the pulse width. Not even really modulating it. We're just going to squeeze the pulse width until we get a nice little pin, okay? And maybe before we do that, let's just listen to what happens when we do that with a normal square wave. Let's turn the volume down a little bit. So we're squeezing the pulse width of this square wave to be super thin, very nasally tone, right? So, and of course we could use one of these other pulse width versions of the square wave. If we take this, back to 0, we have these other kind of square and pulse-ish waves in the basic shape wavetable, though really it's just these 4 shapes are the basic wave shapes. I'm going to take the square wave and I'm just going to pulse width squeeze that thing until it's just the tiniest little pin. Okay, let's mute this now. And we're going to send that super tiny squeezed pulse width square wave, pulse wave. And again, depending on the voice, it might have to be slightly tweaked.
There's not a solo there. 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 There's not a solo there.
So starting to get a little bit of that robotic character. This again is really pulse width into the vocoder, right? Okay, so sawtooth waves, square waves, pulse waves. These are kind of going to be our bread and butter with the vocoder when we're dealing with vocals. And I think there's, of course, we don't have to do this with vocals. We could do this with drum loops. We could do this with any sound, in theory. And so we could always try maybe a drum loop. Let's find just a classic drum loop here. Let's go with something. Let's see what this is. It says Amen break, but who knows? And again, we have to play. So here we are. We've got something other than a vocal. We could put the drums on, as the carrier as well. What if we use drums and select that track as our carrier?
There's not a solo there. 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 There's not a solo there.
It's kind of weird.
There's not a solo there. There's not. There's not a solo there. There's not a solo there. There's.
If we reverse these things, then we can kind of hear what the carrier is doing, or rather what the modulator is doing. It's really affecting the volume character of the signal that's coming through from the or from the carrier. The modulator, which is on the track with the vocoder, is mixed as a kind of a volume characteristic to the audio that's coming in as the carrier.
There's not a solo there. 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 There's not a solo there.
By changing the tuning of the drum loop.
There's not a solo there. 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 There's not a solo there.
Almost tends to sound like we're filtering the voice, right? Okay, let's come back to this thing in the form that we were using it earlier. In fact, let's tell this thing to use noise. I want to talk about a couple of more creative uses of the vocoder. So with the voice, and maybe this is a good time to talk about what's really happening to this signal. The incoming modulator or modulation source, the voice, is being broken up into multiple frequencies, right? We saw that earlier in that graphic we were looking at, where it showed the voice speaking into a microphone, and that information was being sent into a spectrum analyzer, and that's kind of what we're seeing here. That's breaking up the voice into many different frequency bands. We can see how many bands right here. The more bands, the more accurate the vocal recreation will be. So if we set this to 40 bands, we get 40 different slices of frequency content.
There's not a solo there. There's.
Let's set that back to 0.
There's not a solo there. There's not a solo there. There's not a solo there. There's not a solo there.
Right, we can kind of hear the difference in definition there.
There's not a solo there. There's not a solo there. There's not a solo there. There's not a solo there. There's not a solo there. There's not a solo.
It might be subtle going from 40 to 20. What about going to 8?
There's not a solo there. There's not a solo there. There's not a solo there.
All of that motion from frequency range to frequency range is kind of what's defining the vocal character, right? It's kind of like I don't know if you guys have ever seen those experimental videos where they program a piano to speak, right? They have like say a player piano or something like that designed so that it will play notes in maybe impossible ways that a human could not actually play them at a speed, at a rate that they can't play them. And they'll use the changing frequency of the piano going up and down to create the effect of the piano speaking words. If you haven't seen this, it's really interesting. And of course, the piano is breaking down into 88 different frequency bands, though they might be very close together. They might not have the range that this does, 80 hertz to 12,000 hertz. It's not completely out of this world different in that they're taking little tiny chunks of frequency content, and as they piece it together from key to key, it creates the impression of spoken word. And so when we use fewer and fewer chunks of the frequency range, we're going to get less and less definition in terms of the recreation of those words.
There's not a solo there. There's not a solo there. There's not a solo. There's not a solo there.
Now, this is basically broken up in sort of the way that a parametric EQ would be broken up, in that each of these sliders is essentially another frequency range, right? Now, from bottom to top, we're talking about a frequency range of 80 hertz to 12,000 hertz, which is a maybe liberal range that the human voice might appear in. But we can change that range.
There's not a solo there. 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 There's not a solo. There's not a solo there. 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 There's not a solo there.
And notice if we open this up all the way, you can kind of see the distribution of harmonics as they're present here. And if we shift that range,
There's not a solo there. There's not a solo there. There's not a solo there. There's not a solo. There's not a.
now this is something we're not going to be able to do in warps. This is not an easily achievable function inside of a module that might only have a couple of knobs or buttons. So especially the kind of automated morphing of these things might not be nearly as easy to achieve in a hardware vocoder. But inside of the software, it makes it pretty easy, and we can then maybe even shape it further.
Solo there. There's not a 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 solo there.
Okay, so we break that incoming voice into dozens of frequencies. You know, this range is the frequency range of the lowest to the highest vocoder band, frequency band. And those bands are going to be each broken up into small ranges of frequencies, right? If we go back to 4 bands, you know, we're talking 80 to, you know, I don't know, 160 to 500, 500 to 1,000, 1,000 to 12,000. I don't know the specific breakdown of how the math will work, but I'm sure it's still this kind of, is it logarithmic, exponential, something like that. This distribution of frequencies uh, and bands breaks down into that range. Now, where things get interesting is if we change the bandwidth of each of these bands, right? Each one right now is set to consume the entire width of frequencies, the range of frequencies inside of whatever, you know, portion of 80 to 12,000 hertz that one slider is set to control. And again, it's somewhere between 80 and 12,000 hertz, and we could try to divide that up into 40 different chunks, but that might be foolhardy. The point here is that when the bandwidth is at 100%,
there is not a solo there.
we hear all of the frequency content, especially when we have more bands, or most of that frequency content. When we reduce the bandwidth, each of these frequency ranges, each of these little slider ranges from the bottom would be 80 to maybe 120 hertz or something like that. They start to squeeze in from 80 to 120, 120 to 200, whatever that range is per band. They start to squish down into just a very thin range of of frequencies. So we can hear that as we reduce that 100% value.
There's not a solo there. 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 There's not a solo there.
And when we bring this down to 10%, which is the lowest it'll go, it's like we're squeezing each one of these into the range of around one frequency, really, right? Now we're kind of squeezing these down into sine wave bands. And they dance around, of course, because the frequency content is changing from the voice. If we use noise, let's use fewer bands. If we turn off the precise mode, it gives us a more retro feeling vocoder, which might be even less accurate.
There's not a solo there. 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 There's not a solo there.
This gets really interesting if we actually use noise as our modulator as well. What if we take something like analog or operator, something that can generate noise? Oops, let's maybe put this onto a MIDI track. Let's put analog on a new track. And then we'll put the vocoder on that track. We'll tell the vocoder to only take noise, and we'll tell it to modulate itself. And when we do this, might need to increase the level of our noise. Of course, if we increase that bandwidth to 100%, it starts to sound a lot like noise. Fun way to make atmospheric material, right? What if we put a reverb after this? Put it all the way wet. Notice retro is a little bit less precise, as we might glean from the name of the alternative mode. Doesn't matter what pitch you play. The pitch is really at this point defined by these bands, which have been reduced down to this tiny bandwidth. Of course, we're also just bringing in noise. So if we bring in a signal from there we go. From Serum. I do have warps, Analog Assailant. The reason I'm doing it on Ableton is because Ableton's vocoder has a lot more features than Warps has, right? Warps, by definition, is kind of meant to be less flexible in terms of its vocoder functionality, but in terms of getting these, maybe the classic sounds that we were talking about earlier, things like the Daft Punk sound, that super saw, Imogen Heap style hide and seek sound. These are really a matter of having the right tonal character in the carrier synth. So super saws, pulse waves, right? Thin pulse waves that give us that nasal character. These are kind of the waves that we want to maybe start with if we want those classic type of tonalities. Doesn't have to be those, but complicated waves. We listen to sine waves through the vocoder, trying to mix with the voice. Didn't really do much. Triangle waves starting to get there, but it's the brighter, more tonally rich waves that are the ones that are going to give us much more musical results, much more of those classic vocoder style results. So, we talked about the Daft Punk sound, that robot voice type of thing, the intergalactic thing from Beastie Boys. Now that's because the internal oscillator has the option of a pulse wave on warps, right? We could look. Let me bring up the warps page here, because that will give us a little bit of information, right? It'll tell us probably with some definition what common waves are going to be found in this type of a thing. Okay, let's look. Here's the manual. I'll bring that up here. Okay, so, and here we see, hey, it's a block diagram. It's a flow chart showing us two signals, okay? One is the carrier, right? This isn't really a one, but it's I don't even know the name of these insignias, but this is the carrier input, and this is where we're going to send our oscillator signal. Or if we want to use the internal oscillator, you can see right here, it's got the built-in oscillator modes. You can see it's got a sine, a triangle, or square or pulse width wave. We'll probably find some more definition down below about that. The signal is also going through a VCA. There's two VCAs built into this, so we can actually control those VCAs. You can see there's a knob that's going to control the level. There's a knob for that incoming VCA signal on the modulator as well. The internal oscillator switch allows us to choose which oscillator we're hearing, and then these signals are brought in and modulated in this mode. Now, of course, again, keep in mind there are many different modes and warps, so this is going to work a specific way in the vocoder mode. This input signal path is designed to allow for all 9 of the modes and warps to operate. So some of these are going to be non-vocoder, destruction. Some of them are going to be ring mod or wave folding, or the many different modes that turn up inside of warps. So we can see here cross fading, cross folding, diode ring modulation, digital ring modulation, XOR modulation, some logic modulation, comparison and rectification, and then we have a couple of vocoder modes. And we can see here a classic implementation of an analog vocoder with a bank of 20 analysis and 20 synthesis third octave 48 dB filters. Okay, that's what we're seeing in this kind of parametric band division thing inside of Ableton, right? The modulator subband signals are processed by envelope followers, from which are derived the gain of each of the carrier subband signals. So that's that volume control using the envelope following. Timbre warps the connections between the modulator's envelope followers and the carrier's gain elements, effectively shifting up or down the formants extracted from the modulator signal. And we have actually a separate formant control here on the Ableton vocoder. And we see now this is our internal oscillator. Okay, we have 4 different modes. We can push this little internal oscillator button to choose between them. If it's gray or not on, basically, then we're looking to an external oscillator source. Okay, if it is turned on, we get either if the knob is turned up to some, between 0 and 2 o'clock or 1:30 or something, we get sine wave, triangle, or sawtooth, depending on red, yellow, or green, yellow, or red modes. Again, pushing this internal oscillator button. Past 2 o'clock, we get sawtooth, pulse waves, and noise. Okay, so that may be a little bit closer to what we've been dealing with for our basic carrier signals to get these classic tonalities of the vocoder. So let's see. As the algorithm knob is turned clockwise, the release time of the envelope followers is increased. So it follows it in a kind of a looser form. By turning the knob fully clockwise, and I think we're talking about the algorithm knob here, the modulator signal is frozen. The carrier is filtered by whichever formants are present in the modulator before the knob reached that position. So we kind of freeze the incoming vocal, and then the carrier is going to be filtered with whatever that frozen bit is. You can see it's talking about this like snowflake insignia here on the panel. So we're kind of freezing the audio as it's coming in to the modulator input, and kind of almost like micro looping it, basically. Um, that's probably with some caveats. It's not just basic micro looping, but it's something of that effect. So we do have a formant control here.
There's not a soul out there.
Let's put our vocoder back in the right place. Let's reset its parameters. Just go back to 20 bands. Turn off our noise generator. Our noise generator through Reverb, though, that was kind of cool too.
There's not a soul out there. 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 There's not a soul out there.
So formant is, in a sense, shifting the fundamental.
There's not a soul out there. There's not a soul out there.
The attack and release, these are the envelope follower functions. So we can maybe soften, loosen the. This is kind of that freezing. So you can see that's starting to actually, in a sense, freeze the audio. It's not really freezing it. It's just taking so long to react to the incoming volume changes in that envelope follower, right? An envelope follower simply tracks the rise and fall of volume so that we can map that to control something else inside of the carrier. And so by turning those things way, way up, we're essentially making it gloss over all of the rising and falling peaks and valleys in the waveform on our vocal, and that kind of keeps us that really flattens out, it smooths out all of that volume change, which is what's influencing the synthesizer. So some similar things to what we just saw in the Warp's manual here in the vocoder in Ableton. Maybe not quite as much control over these parameters in Warps, but Mutable Instruments is very well known for trimming down the complexity of the operation of an instrument to just those fine details, those fine elements that by shifting from one mode to another mode, from non-freeze mode to another, it automatically alters certain characteristics inside of the behind the panel, basically. And all we have to do is turn one knob. In reality, many things might be happening, and that's, I think, it's one of the more complicated perspectives to take apart, because on one hand, that makes things a lot easier to perform, right? It makes the instrument a lot easier to play with and get useful musical results out of it. On the other hand, it maybe limits us to certain functions that we might want some in-between parameters, and we just don't necessarily have the access to those. So that's where you get things like parasites and these alt firmwares where people want to tweak some of those not so arbitrary decisions that the designer made, right? They're not making those decisions just because, oh, I don't like the specific sound that we could achieve with this other function. It's because they think it's going to be more approachable and easy to use, more musically applicable, probably. Sometimes maybe it's just because they don't like XYZ, sounds or techniques or something like that. But I would imagine that's less often the motivation than uh, we want to make an interface that's usable, right? The interface on the vocoder in Ableton is not the most usable interface, as we saw. When we load this up,
There's not a solo there. There's not a solo there.
nightmare.
There's not a solo there. There's not a solo there. There's not a solo there.
There's where our formant might come in extra handy.
There's not a solo there. There's not a solo there. There's not a solo there.
The noise is great when we turn down the bandwidth, but
There's not a solo there. There's not a solo there. There's not a solo there. There's not a solo there.
so these are the accommodations that designers have to make when they're trying to come up with some usable interface that people will want, people will buy, people will tell their friends about, and how easy it is to use, how fast it is, how legit it sounds. This is just part of one of the harder decisions that, or really conceptual starting points, I suppose, that a designer has to think about, whether it's software or hardware. Software, obviously, we get a few more options available to us because we're not limited by hardware costs and physical limitations. If we tried to fit everything in this vocoder into a panel for warps, warps would probably be the size of elements, if not bigger. So if you guys have ever seen Sputnik Modular before they got bought out, were developing a spectral filter that was like 60 HP. It was huge. And that was just to accommodate all of the bands on the filter, right? To make something like this multi-band thing. One thing is we wouldn't be able to probably make it multi-band, at least not easily. And just that on a panel, like 20 sliders, 40 sliders on a panel is going to be cost prohibitive to the maker and to the consumer. No one, it's just very hard to convince somebody to buy or even make something that's going to require that many parts. It means that to go into production, they're going to need 20 times the sliders that someone else might need. So, just a cost issue, I think, more than anything. And maybe a little bit of ingenuity inside of that, right? When we're limited by one area, then we have to think outside the box on other things. And again, that's, I think, where Mutable Instruments really excels among other areas that they're really awesome at. But Mutable is kind of known for let's cut it down. Let's make it approachable, limited user interface, perhaps, but with all the functions that we might need somewhere in there. There's exceptions to that. Elements is gigantic. Marbles is pretty complicated to look at, I have to say. But, with those devices, maybe they're taking a different approach. They're going for something that can be a lot more widely applicable, maybe. Yeah. Questions, concerns, complaints, angry rants. All of these things are allowed these days. Yeah, so back to one point that I was making early on. We yesterday did a sound design reverse engineering show, right? We took a few sounds that were submitted from you guys in real time and recreated those sounds. I would love it if you guys didn't get to see that show, if you could go check that out and let me know if that's something you want to see more of. For sure, the Behringer vocoder clone. I haven't played with that. I'm sure it's good. There's a lot of great hardware vocoders. The Microkorg has a great vocoder built into it. Maybe not the best user interface. Roland made a boutique vocoder a while back too. I can't remember. Is it the VT3? No, that's not it. It's something else. It's like the 808 and 909 that they made. It's one of those smaller tabletop synthesizers. Um, but I don't doubt the quality of that Behringer vocoder. I at least not in its out of the box state. So I'm sure it sounds great. But they added a carrier input to the original design. Oh, that's handy. So you don't have to use the built-in synthesizer, right? You can use, like we're doing here, instead of the noise, we can use an external input. Very useful to have something like that. Yeah. So yeah. Anyway, if you guys would like to see more of the sound recreation, sound reverse engineering stuff, yeah, Fumana, that's a great example of what I was talking about, right? Now, different approach, amazing module, but a different mindset, right? That's Bird Kids, I believe, right? I mean, they make great stuff. They make beautiful instruments, I have to say, but a different approach conceptually to designing an instrument, right? A similar instrument to Warp's, different hands-on experience, different, you know, application of the use of space and these types of things. So probably a bit of a learning curve on that one too. Certainly, there's one on Warps. We have to learn these modules individually. It's like a plugin or an effect or something. You have to, if you want to know everything about it, you got to spend some time with it. You got to read the manual, these types of things. Frap Tools, excuse me. Sorry, that was Bird Kids makes great stuff too. So not picking sides there, but yeah, Frap Tools also makes incredibly beautiful modules. Um, so yeah, we got a copyright strike, not a strike. Sorry, I don't want to misspeak here because the YouTube parlance is important. We got a copyright ding, a copyright claim against yesterday's video because we were remaking the sound from Joey Beltram's Energy Flash. Of course, that song, like many others, is like most other music that's digitally released at this point, is managed by some rights management company, probably the distributor, whoever they put it out with. Believe Music, I think, is what they were called. And so we got a claim. The video can apparently stay up. No beef on my part. I don't care about one demonetized video. And honestly, I'm frankly okay with doing these videos every once in a while, as long as it doesn't end up striking the channel, because I would really shit a brick if we lost all of our subscribers and everybody. So it does fall under fair use, certainly. I think there's no question about that. But the YouTube system, the Content ID system, is not smart enough for fair use claims at this point, and the danger falls in. This is where YouTube's system starts to really drive people bananas, because you get a copyright strike or a copyright claim, excuse me. This is where you put up a video or you put out we did a live stream, remade some sounds. There were maybe, tiny little chunks of the track, because to do that process, we have to A and B the sound we're remaking and the sound we're actually, the synth that we're tweaking to sound like the original. And without doing that, we really lose out. It's basically impossible to do sound re-engineering or regeneration without doing that A and B comparison. So one option going forward is I can just send the links for the tracks into the chat and just mute the signal until I hear the A side, and then we can unmute it and go back to the B side. This doesn't necessarily prevent copyright claims, because if we're remaking that sound in an accurate form and we're trying to play it even in the melody that it's originally come from, then it still might get struck as something that is too similar to a content ID registered piece of info. So the that's one option, though. That's one thing that might lessen the likelihood of getting a strike. But once a claim is made, I have an option of disputing it or letting it lie. And if I dispute the claim, it all of the control falls upon the content manager. Okay, and that at this point is some faceless digital distributor called Believe Music, who probably has no interest whatsoever in unflagging our video. Right, once they've flagged it as a copyright claim, I can either let it sit, in which case my video is monetized and all of the input is, or all of the monetization is sent to the claimant, meaning Believe Music and Joey Beltram. Again, I don't really care about that for one video because it's, it's pennies. I don't care about that. I'm more concerned about the fact that if I do say, hey, this isn't a illegal copyright use, this is fair use for educational purposes, all they have to do is say, nope, no, it's not. Click a button, and they not only take the video down, but also potentially give us the first of 3 copyright strikes. Okay, it's a claim right now, and if I dispute it, then and the claimant says, no, we don't agree with your claim, then it strikes our channel, right? It hits Voltage Control Labs channel, which, I made videos for 4 years solid, and we've got like 10,000 plus subscribers now. Thank you, all of you. Thank you. And I don't want to lose you. I don't want to like piss that away for a couple of cents that otherwise is just going to go to Joey Beltram. And it could go worse places. I don't care if Joey Beltram made a great track. I'm not at all claiming that I deserve anything for Joey Beltram's track, but hopefully you understand here. There's a disconnect. There was just a video the other day. Another channel posted a video demonstrating, I think it was the Behringer Poly D, right? The polyphonic, the polyphonic Model D, the Moog, right? He just demonstrating the filter sweep on the thing, and it got copyright struck by Chemical Brothers, right? Now it's not like Chemical Brothers went online and were like, "Oh, fuck that," No, again, it's this system where the Chemical Brothers, to release their music, they go through a digital distributor. The digital distributor processes their work. That work gets added to the Content ID system, which is a mega database of all of the video and audio content that's especially corporate controlled video and audio content, right? And if anything comes up online, SoundCloud, YouTube, Twitch, any online content site that the Content ID system flags, you're kind of screwed. You're kind of left without any recourse, short of suing YouTube or something like that. Which, if anybody out there wants to finance a lawsuit against YouTube, call me. But most of us aren't going to have the option to do that. Now, the good news about the filter sweep video is that the guy made another video, a response video, kind of saying, "Hey, look, I got a a flag for playing a synthesizer, and this is lame, and maybe my subscribers or fans or maybe even the Chemical Brothers will see this and pass it down the chain and you know make it right, basically. And in fact, that happened. The Chemical Brothers got in contact with their digital rights management company, and the flag was removed. Right. So I'm not sending you guys out to hassle Joey Beltram or Believe Music at this point, because that would be, I think, counterproductive. And again, it's not too big of a uh, you know uh, chip off my shoulder here to let it be. But um, this is one of the things that I love to do more than anything, especially in my synth classes. And I think it would probably be an exceptionally popular series to do this live every week or maybe a couple times a week. And so I'm just trying to figure out. I have, even up until now, I've been trying to think about and figure out um, how can we make this work. And short of going individually to the major rights holders and um, making some sort of deal with them, which again, that's like kind of, I think, out of my wheelhouse a bit. I would need some legal assistance to make all of that happen. Some sort of representation, which is, I'm sure, not cheap or easy to come by. So, aside from that, then we're kind of dead in the water, left to deal with the system how it is. And until they come up with a better system, or some content creator comes around and forces the issue, which is going to take a very wealthy content creator, and in most cases, the system is working in their benefit. So why take that initiative? It would be cool for everyone else, certainly, but it's a difficult landscape, and it's one of the limitations of sharing on these systems. So unfortunately, that's just kind of how it is. But Sarah, I see your request there about acid sounds. I think what we'll do is maybe we kind of touched a little bit on that yesterday in our show, going into those Joey Beltram sounds. So maybe check that out, and then this week we could maybe dive into a special show just on acid. That might be a sensible use of our time. But I think we'll leave that for another day. But we will definitely come back and talk about acid house, acid bass, 303 style acid. Okay. Well, I think we've droned on long enough here. Speaking of, just get a little of that going. Rock out from here. So, anyway, thanks you guys for coming in again. We're going to take tomorrow off. It's Sunday. I'm not a religious person, but I do like to have a day of the week off every once in a while, and I like to veg out like you guys, I'm sure, do. And seems like prime vegging time right now. So I hope you guys are all taking care of yourselves. I hope you're being careful. I hope you're having fun despite the crazy times that we're in right now. And stretch this audio way out, give us a little bit of expression there. So Monday we'll be back. if you guys get a chance, by all means, tell your friends. Just trying to get the word out. I'm not a very good promoter, as you might have figured out. So if you guys can pass the word along about our show, I would just so appreciate it and love you guys for doing that. And I am just so happy, and I feel lucky to get to hang out with you guys all day. Not all day, but every day. And so please take care. Have a great weekend. And we will continue Monday at noon again. All right, you guys, take care.